going. The town of the little people into which I shall now take you, dear reader, is exactly in the middle of that blessed pail into which Jews have been packed as closely as herring in a barrel and told to increase and multiply. The name of the town is Kasrilivka. How did this name originate? I'll tell you. Among us Jews, poverty has many faces and many aspects. A poor man is an unlucky man. He is a pauper, a beggar, a schnorrer, a starveling, a tramp, or a plain failure. A different tone is used in speaking of each one, but all these names express human wretchedness. However, there's still another name, Kasril, or Kasrilik. That name is spoken in a different tone altogether, almost a bragging tone. For instance, "Oh, am I ever a Kasrilik?" A Kasrilik is not just an ordinary pauper, a failure in life. On the contrary, he is a man who has not allowed poverty to degrade him. He laughs at it. He is poor but cheerful. Stuck away in a corner of the world, isolated from the surrounding country, the town stands, orphaned, dreaming, bewitched, immersed in itself and remote from the noise and bustle, the confusion and tumult and greed which men have created about them and have dignified with high-sounding names like culture, progress, civilization. A proper person may take off his hat with respect to these things, but not these little people. Not only do they know nothing of automobiles, modern travel, airplanes, for a long time they refused to believe in the existence of the old ordinary railroad train. Such a thing could not be, they said. Why, they said, it's a dream, a fairy tale. You might as well talk of merry-go-rounds in heaven. But it happened once that a householder of Kasrilivka had to go to Moscow. When he came back, he swore with many oaths that it was true. He himself had ridden in a train to Moscow, and it had taken him, he shrugged his shoulders, less than an hour. This the little people interpreted to mean that he had ridden less than an hour and then walked the rest of the way. But still the fact of the train remained. If a Jew and a householder of Kasrilivka swore to it, they could not deny that there was such a thing as a train. It had to be true. He could not have invented it out of thin air. He even explained to them the whole miracle of the train and drew a diagram on paper. He showed them how the wheels turned, the smokestack whistled, the carriages flew, and people rode to Moscow. The little people of Kasrilivka listened and listened, nodded their heads solemnly, and deep in their hearts they laughed at him. What a story! The wheels turn, the smokestack whistle, the carriages fly, and people ride to Moscow and then come back again. That's how they all are, these little people. None of them are gloomy, none of them are worried little men of affairs, but on the contrary, they are known everywhere as jesters, storytellers, a cheerful, light-hearted breed of men. Poor but cheerful. It's hard to say what makes them so happy. Nothing, just the sheer joy of living. Living? If you ask them, how do you live? They will answer with a shrug and a laugh. How do we live? Who knows? We live. A remarkable thing, whenever you meet them, they're scurrying like rabbits, this one here, that one there. They never have time to stop. What are you hurrying for? What am I hurrying for? Well, it's like this. If we hurry, we think we might run into something, earn a few pennies, provide for the Sabbath. To provide for the Sabbath, that is their goal in life. All week they work and sweat, wear themselves out, live without food or drink, just so there is something for the Sabbath. And when the Holy Sabbath arrives, let Yehupetz perish, let Odessa be razed, let Paris itself sink into the earth. Kasrilivka lives. And this is a fact, that since Kasrilivka was founded, no Jew has gone hungry there on the Sabbath. Is it possible that there is a Jew who does not have fish for the Sabbath? If he has no fish, then he has meat. If he has no meat, then he has herring. If he has no herring, then he has white bread. If he has no white bread, then he has black bread and onions. And if he has no black bread and onions, then he borrows some from his neighbor. Next week the neighbor will borrow from him. The world is a wheel and it keeps turning. The Israelite repeats this maxim and shows you with his hand how it turns. To him, a maxim, a witty remark is everything. For an apt remark he will forsake his mother and father, as the saying goes. The tales you hear about these little people sound fabulous, but you may be sure they are all true. For instance, there's the story of the Israelite who got tired of starving in Israelka and went out into the wide world to seek his fortune. He left the country, wandered far and wide, and finally reached Paris. There, naturally, he wanted to see Rothschild. For how can a Jew come to Paris and not visit Rothschild? But they didn't let him in. What's the trouble, he wants to know. Your coat is torn, they tell him. You fool, says the Jew. If I had a good coat, would I have gone to Paris? It looked hopeless. But a Israelite never gives up. He thought a while and said to the doorman, tell your master that it isn't an ordinary beggar who has come to his door, but a Jewish merchant who has brought him a piece of goods such as you can't find in Paris for any amount of money. Hearing this, Rothschild became curious and asked that the merchant be brought to him. Shalom Alechem, said Rothschild. Alechem Shalom, said the merchant. Take a seat. And where do you come from? I come from Kasrilivka. What good news do you bring? Well, Mr. Rothschild, they say in our town, that you are not so badly off. If I had only half of what you own, or only a third, you would still have enough left. And honors, I imagine, you don't lack either, for people always look up to a man of riches. Then what do you lack? One thing only, eternal life. That is what I have to sell you. When Rothschild heard this, he said, well, let's get down to business. What will it cost me? It will cost you, here the man stopped to consider, it will cost you 300 rubles. Is that your best price? My very best. I could have said a lot more than 300, but I said it, so it's final. Rothschild said no more, but counted out 300 rubles, one by one. Our Kasrilivkite slipped the money into his pocket and said to Rothschild, if you want to live forever, my advice to you is to leave this noisy, busy Paris and move to our town of Kasrilivka. There you can never die, because since Kasrilivka has been a town, no rich man has ever died there. And then there's the story of a man who got as far as America. But if I started to tell you all the tales of these little people, I'd have to sit with you for 3 days and 3 nights and talk and talk and talk. Instead, let us pass on to a description of the little town itself. Shall I call it a beautiful little town? From a distance it looks, how shall I say it, like a loaf of bread, thickly studded with poppy seed. Some of the houses are built on the slope of a hill, and the rest are huddled together at the base, one on top of the other, like gravestones in an ancient cemetery. There are no streets to speak of because the houses are not built according to any plan. And besides, where is there room for such a thing? Why should there be vacant space where you can build something on it? It is written that the earth is to be inhabited, not merely to be gazed at. Yet don't be upset. There are some streets, big streets, little streets, back streets, and alleys. What if they happen to twist and turn uphill and downhill and suddenly end up in a house or a cellar or just a hole in the ground? If you're a stranger, never go out alone at night without a lantern. As for the little people who live there, don't worry about them. A Kasrilivkite in Kasrilivka among Kasrilivkites will never get lost. Each one finds the way to his own house, to his wife and children, like a bird to its own nest. And then in the center of the city there is a white half circle, or perhaps it is a square where you find the stores, shops, market stands, stalls, and tables. There every morning the peasants from the surrounding countryside congregate with their products, fish and onions, horseradish, parsnips, and other vegetables. They sell these things and buy from the little people other necessities of life, and from this the Kasrilivkites draw their livelihood. A meager one, but better than nothing. And in the square also lie all the town's goats, warming themselves in the sun. There also stands the synagogues, the meeting houses, the chapels and schools of the town where Jewish children study the Holy Writ. The noise they and the rabbis make with their chanting is enough to deafen one. The baths where the women go to bathe are also there, and the poorhouse where the old men die, and other such public institutions. No, the Kasrilivkites have never heard of canals or waterworks or electricity or other such luxuries. But what does that matter? Everywhere people die the same death, and they are placed in the same earth, and are beaten down with the same spades. Thus my Rabbi Israel, used to say, when he was happiest at a wedding or other celebration, after he had a few glasses of wine and was ready to lift up the skirts of his long coat and dance a kazatsky. But the real pride of Kasrilivka is her cemeteries. This lucky town has two rich cemeteries, the old and the new. The new one is old enough and rich enough in graves. Soon there will be no place to put anyone, especially if a pogrom should break out, or any of the other misfortunes which befall us in these times. But it is of the old cemetery that the people of Kasrilivka are especially proud. This old cemetery, though it is overgrown with grass and with bushes, and has practically no upright headstones, they still value as they might a treasure, a rare gem, a piece of wealth, and guard it like the apple of their eyes. For this is not only the place where their ancestors lie, rabbis, men of piety, learned ones, scholars, and famous people, including the dead from the ancient massacres of Smolenski's time, but also the only piece of land of which they are the masters, the only bit of earth they own where a blade of grass can sprout, and a tree can grow, and the air is fresh, and one can breathe freely. You should see what goes on in this old cemetery a month before the New Year, during the quotes, days of weeping. Men and women, mainly women, swarm up and down the paths to their ancestors' graves. From all the surrounding country they come to weep and to pour their hearts out at the holy graves. Believe me, there is no place where one can weep so freely and with such abandon as in quotes, the field of Kasrilivka. In the synagogue a person can weep pretty freely too, but the synagogue doesn't come up to the cemetery. The cemetery is a source of income for the Kasrilivkite stonecutters, innkeepers, cantors, and sextons, and the month before the New Year's is for the paupers thereabouts and the old women and the cripples the real harvest time. Have you been in our field yet? A Kasrilivkite will ask you cheerfully, as though he were asking if you had been in his father's vineyard. If you haven't been there, do him a kindness. Go down into the field. Read the old half-obliterated inscriptions on the leaning tombstones, and you will find in them the story of a whole people. And if you happen to be a man of feeling and imagination, then you will look upon this poor little town with its rich cemeteries and repeat the old verses. How beautiful are your tents, O Jacob! How good are your resting places, O Israel! Tit for tat. Once I was a rabbiner, not a rabbi. That is, I was called a rabbi, but a rabbi of the crown. To the old country Jews, I don't have to explain what a rabbi of the crown is. They know the breed. What are his great responsibilities? He fills out birth certificates, officiates at circumcisions, performs marriages, grants divorces. He gets his share from the living and the dead. In the synagogue he has a place of honor, and when the congregation rises, he's the first to stand. On legal holidays he appears in a stovepipe hat and holds forth in his best Russian. Gospodo priznание. To take it for granted that among our people a rabbiner is well beloved, let us not say any more. Say rather that we put up with him as we do a government inspector or a deputy sheriff. And yet he is chosen from among the people. That is, every 3 years a proclamation is sent us. Na oznavarnya pred pisania, or as we would say, your lord the governor orders you to come together in the synagogue, poor little Jews, and pick out the rabbiner for yourself. Then the campaign begins. Candidates, hot discussions, brandy, and maybe even a bribe or two. After which come charges and counter-charges. The elections are annulled, and we are ordered to hold new elections, and again the proclamation, Na oznavanya pred pisania. Again candidates, discussions, party organization, brandy, a bribe or two. That was the life. Well, there I was, a rabbiner in a small town in the province of Poltava. But I was anxious to be a modern one. I wanted to serve the public. So I dropped the formalities of my position and began to mingle with the people, as we say, to stick my head into the community pot. I got busy with the Talmud Torah, the charity fund, interpreted the law, settled disputes, or just gave plain advice. The love of settling disputes, helping people out or advising them, I inherited from my father and my uncles. They, may they rest in peace, also enjoyed being bothered all the time with other people's business. There are two kinds of people in the world, those that you can't bother at all, and others whom you can bother all the time. You can climb right on their heads, naturally not in one jump, but gradually. First you climb into their laps, then onto their shoulders, then their heads, and after that you can jump up and down on their heads and stamp on their hearts with your heavy boots as long as you want to. I was that kind, and without boasting I can tell you that I had plenty of ardent followers and plain hangers-on who weren't ashamed to come every day and fill my head with their clamoring and sit around till late at night. They never refused a glass of tea or cigarettes. Newspapers and books they took without asking. In short, I was a regular fellow. Well, there came a day, the door opened, and in walked the very foremost man of the town, the sparkling best, the very cream of the city. 4 householders, men of affairs, you could almost say, real men of substance. And who were these men? 3 of them were the Troika. That was what we called them in our town because they were together all the time. Partners in whatever business any one of them was in. They always fought. They were always suspicious of each other and watched everything the others did. And still they never separated, working always on this principle. If the business is a good one, and there's profit to be made, why shouldn't I have a lick at the bone too? And on the other hand, if it should end in disaster, you'll be buried along with me, and lie with me deep in the earth. And what does God do? He brings together the 3 partners with a 4th one. They operate together a little less than a year and end up in a brawl. That is why they're here. What happened? Quote, since God created thieves, swindlers, and crooks, you never saw a thief, swindler, or crook like this one. This is the way the 3 old partners described the 4th one to me. And he, the 4th, said the same about them. Exactly the same, word for word. And who was this 4th one? He was a quiet little man, a little innocent-looking fellow, with thick dark eyebrows, under which a pair of shrewd, ironic little eyes watched everything you did. Everyone called him Nachman Lekach. His real name was Nachman Nosson, but everybody called him Nachman Lekach because, as you know, Nosen is the Hebrew for he gave, and Lekach means he took. And in all the time we knew him, no one had ever seen him give anything to anyone, while at taking no one was better. Where were we? Oh yes. So they came to the rabbiner with the complaints to see if he could find a way of straightening out their tangled accounts. Whatever you decide, Rabbi, and whatever you decree, and whatever you say will be final. That is how the three old partners said it, and the fourth, Reb Nachman, nodded with that innocent look on his face to indicate that he too left it up to me. For the reason his eyes said that I know that I have done no wrong. And he sat down in a corner, folded his arms across his chest like an old woman, fixed his shrewd, ironic little eyes on me, and waited to see what his partners would have to say. And when they had all laid out their complaints and charges, presented all their evidence, said all they had to say, he got up, patted down his thick eyebrows, and not looking at the others at all, only at me with those deep, shrewd little eyes of his, he proceeded to demolish their claims and charges so completely that it looked as if they were the thieves, swindlers, and crooks, the three partners of his, and he, Nachman Lekach, was a man of virtue and piety. The little chicken, that is slaughtered before Yom Kippur to atone for our sins, a sacrificial lamb. And every word that you heard him say is a complete lie. It never was and never could be. It's simply out of the question. And he proved with evidence, arguments, and supporting data that everything he said was true and holy, as if Moses himself had said it. All the time he was talking, the others, the troika, could hardly sit in their chairs. Every moment one or another of them jumped up, clutched his head or his heart. Of all things, how can a man talk like that, such lies and falsehoods? It was almost impossible to calm them down, to keep them from tearing at the fourth one's beard. As for me, the rabbiner, it was hard, very hard to crawl out from under this horrible tangle, because by now it was clear that I had a first band to deal with, all four of them swindlers, thieves and crooks, and informers to boot, and all four of them deserving a severe punishment. But what? At last this idea occurred to me, and I said to them, "Are you ready, my friends? I'm prepared to hand down my decision. My mind is made up, but I won't disclose what I have to say until each of you has deposited 25 rubles to prove that you will act upon the decision I am about to hand down." With the greatest of pleasure, the three spoke out at once, and Nachman Lekach nodded his head, and all four reached into their pockets, and each one counted out his 25 on the table. I gathered up the money, locked it up in a drawer, and then I gave them my decision in these words. Having heard the complaints and the arguments of both parties, and having examined your accounts and studied your evidence, I find, according to my understanding and deep conviction, that all four of you are in the wrong, and not only in the wrong, but that it is a shame and a scandal for a Jewish people to conduct themselves in such a manner, to falsify accounts, perjure yourself, and even act as informers. Therefore I have decided that since we have a Talmud Torah in our town, with many children who have neither clothes nor shoes, and whose parents have nothing with which to pay their tuition, and since there has been no help at all from you gentlemen, to get a few pennies from you one has to reach down into your very gizzards, therefore it is my decision that this 100 rubles of yours shall go to the Talmud Torah. And as for you gentlemen, you can go home in good health, and thanks for your contribution. The poor children will now have some shoes and socks and shirts and pants, and I'm sure they'll pray to God for you and your children. Amen. Having heard the sentence, the three old partners, the troika, looked from one to the other, flushed, unable to speak. A decision like this they had not anticipated. The only one who could say a word was Rabbi Nachman Lekach. He got up, patted down his thick eyebrows, held out a hand, and looking at me with his ironic little eyes, said this: "I thank you, Rabbi Rabiner, on behalf of all the four of us, for the wise decision which you have just made. Such a judgment could have been made by no one since King Solomon himself. There is only one thing that you forgot to say, Rabbi Rabiner, and that is, what is your fee for this wise and just decision?" "I beg your pardon," I tell him. "You've come to the wrong address. I'm not one of those rabbiners who tax the living and the dead." That is the way I answered him, like a real gentleman, and this was his reply: "If that's the case, then you're not only a sage and a rabbi among men, you're an honest man besides. So if you would care to listen, I'll tell you a story. Say that we will pay you for your pains at least with a story. Good enough, even with 2 stories. In that case, sit down, Rabbi Rabiner, and let us have your cigarette case. I will tell you an interesting story, a true one too, something that happened to me. What happened to others I don't like to talk about." And we lit our cigarettes, sat down around the table, and Rabbi Nachman spread out his thick eyebrows, and looking at me with his shrewd, smiling little eyes, he slowly began to tell his true story of what had once happened to him himself. All this happened to me a long time ago. I was still a young man, and I was living not far from here in a village near the railroad. I traded in this and that. I had a small tavern, made a living. A Rothschild I didn't become, but bread we had, and in time there were about 10 Jewish families living close by, because, as you know, if one of us makes a living, others come around. They think you're shoveling up gold, but that isn't the point. What I was getting at was that right in the midst of the busy season, one year, when things were moving and traffic was heavy, my wife had to go and have a baby, our boy, our first son. What do you say to that? Congratulations, congratulations, everybody. But that isn't all. You have to have a bris, the circumcision. I dropped everything, went into town, bought all the good things I could find, and came back with a mohel, with all his instruments, and for good measure I also brought the shamas of the synagogue. I thought that with these 2 holy men and myself and the neighbors, we'd have the 10 men we needed with 1 to spare. But what does God do? He has one of my neighbors get sick. He is sick in bed and can't come to the bris. You can't carry him. And another one has to pack off and go off to the city. He can't wait another day. And here I am without the 10 men. Go do something. Here it is, Friday. Of all days, my wife has to pick Friday to have the bris, the day before the Shabbos. The mohel is frantic. He has to go back right away. The shamas is actually in tears. "What did you ever drag me off here for?" they both want to know. What can I do? All I can think of is to run to the railroad station. Who knows? So many people come through every day. Maybe God will send someone. And that's just what happened. I come running to the station. The agent has just called out the train that is about to leave. I look around. A little roly-poly man carrying a huge traveling bag comes flying by, all sweating and out of breath, straight towards the lunch counter. He looks over the dishes. What is there a good Jew can take in a country railroad station? A piece of herring, an egg. Poor fellow, you could see his mouth was watering. I grabbed him by the sleeve. "Uncle, are you looking for something to eat?" I asked him. And the look he gives me says, "How did you know that?" I keep on talking. "May you live to be 100. God himself must have sent you." He still doesn't understand it. So I proceed. "Do you want to earn the blessings of eternity and at the same time eat a beef roast that'll melt in your mouth with a fresh white loaf right out of the oven?" He still looks at me as if I'm crazy. "Who are you? What do you want?" So I tell him the whole story, what a misfortune had overtaken us. Here we are, all ready for the bris. The mohel is waiting, the food is ready, and such food, and we need a 10th man. What's that got to do with me, he asks, and I tell him. What's that got to do with you? Why, everything depends on you. You're the 10th man. I beg you, come with me. You will earn all the rewards of heaven and have a delicious dinner in the bargain. Are you crazy, he asks me, or are you just out of your head? My train is leaving in a few minutes, and it's Friday afternoon, almost sundown. Do you know what that means? In a few more hours, the Shabbos will catch up with me, and I'll be stranded. So what, I tell him, so you'll take the next train, and in the meantime you'll learn eternal life and taste the soup with fresh dumplings that only my wife can make. Well, to make the story long, I had my way. The roast and the hot soup with fresh dumplings did their work. You could see my customer licking his lips. So I grabbed the traveling bag and I lead him home, and we go through with the bris. It was a real pleasure. You could smell the roast all over the house. It had so much garlic in it. A roast like that, with fresh, warm twist, is a delicacy from heaven. And when you consider that we had some fresh dill pickles, and a bottle of beer, and some cognac before the meal, and cherry cider after the meal, you can imagine the state our guest was in. His cheeks shone, and his head glistened. But what then? Before we knew it, the afternoon was gone. My guest jumps up, he looks around and sees what time it is and almost has a stroke. He reaches for his traveling bag. Where is it? I say to him, what's your hurry? In the first place, do you think we'll let you run off like that before the Shabbos? And in the second place, who are you to leave on a journey an hour or two before the Shabbos? And if you're going to get caught out in the country somewhere, you might just as well stay here with us. He groans and sighs. How could I think like that to him, keep him so late? What did I have against him? Why hadn't I reminded him earlier? He doesn't stop bothering me, so I say to him, in the first place, did I have to tell you that it was Friday afternoon? Didn't you know it yourself? And in the second place, how do you know? Maybe it's the way God wanted it. Maybe he wanted you to stay here for Shabbos so you could taste some of my wife's fish. I can guarantee you that as long as you have eaten fish, you haven't eaten fish like my wife's fish, not even in a dream. Well, that ended the argument. We said our evening prayers, had a glass of wine, and my wife brings the fish to the table. My guest's nostrils swell out, a new light shines in his eyes, and he goes after that fish as if he hadn't eaten a thing all day. He can't get over it. He praises it to the skies. He fills a glass with brandy and drinks a toast to the fish. And then comes the soup. Especially rich Shabbos soup with noodles, and he likes that too. And the tzimmus also, and the meat that goes with the tzimmus, a nice fat piece of brisket. I'm telling you, he just sat there licking his fingers. When we're finishing the last course, he turns to me. Do you know what I'll tell you? Now that it's all over, I'm really glad that I stayed over for Shabbos. It's been a long time since I've enjoyed a Shabbos as I've enjoyed this one. If that's how you feel, I'm happy, I tell him. But wait, this is only a sample. Wait till tomorrow. Then you'll see what my wife can do. And so it was the next day after service. We sat down at the table. Well, you should have seen the spread. First, the appetizers. Crisp wafers, chopped herring and onions, and chicken fat with radishes, and chopped liver and eggs and grimness. And after that, the cold fish and the meat from yesterday's tzimmus, and then the jellied meats food, or visnoga as you call it, with thin slices of garlic, and after that the potato choned with the kugel that had been in the oven all night. And you know what that smells like when you take it out of the oven and take the cover off the pot. And what it tastes like. Our visitor could not find words to praise it. So I tell him, this is still nothing. Wait until you have tasted our borscht tonight. Then you'll know what good food is. And then he laughs out loud, a friendly laugh at his true, and says to me, yes, but how far do you think I'll be from here by the time your borscht is ready? So I laugh even louder, and he doesn't say, you can forget that right now. Do you think you'll be going off tonight? And so it was. As soon as the lights were lit and we had a glass of wine to start up the new week, my friend begins to pack his things again. So I call out to him, "Are you crazy? Do you think we'll let you go off? The Lord knows where at night. And besides, where's your train?" "What?" he yells at me. "No train? Why, you're murdering me. You know I have to leave." But I say, "May this be the greatest misfortune in your life. Your train will come, if all is well, around dawn tomorrow. In the meantime, I hope your appetite and digestion are good, because I can smell the borscht already. All I ask," I say, "is just tell me the truth. Tell me if you've ever touched a borscht like this before. But I want the absolute truth." What's the use of talking? He had to admit it. Never before in all his life had he tasted a borscht like this. Never. He even started to ask how to make the borscht, what you put into it, and how long you cooked it. Everything. And I say, "Don't worry about that. Here, taste this wine and tell me what you think of it. After all, you're an expert. But the truth, remember, nothing but the truth, because if there's anything I hate, it's flattery." So we took a glass, and then another glass, and we went to bed. And what do you think happened? My traveler overslept and missed the train early the next morning. When he wakes up, he boils over. He jumps on me like a murderer. Wasn't it up to me, out of fairness and decency, to wake him up in time? Because of me, he's going to have to take a loss, a heavy loss. He doesn't even know himself how heavy. It was all my fault. I ruined him. So I let him talk. I listen quietly, and when he's through, I say, "Tell me yourself, aren't you a queer sort of person? In the first place, what's your hurry? What are you rushing for? How long is a person's life altogether? Does he have to spoil that little with rushing and hurrying? And in the second place, have you forgotten that today is the third day since the bris? Doesn't that mean a thing to you? Where we come from, on the third day we're in the habit of putting on a feast better than the one at the bris itself. The third day, it's something to celebrate. You're not going to spoil the celebration, are you?" What can he do? He can't control himself anymore, and he starts laughing, a hysterical laugh. "What good does it do to talk?" he says. "You're a real leech." "Just as you say," I tell him, "but after all, you're a visitor, aren't you?" At the dinner table, after we had a drink or two, I call out to him, "Look," I say, "it may not be proper, after all we're Jews, to talk about milk and such things while eating meat. But I'd like to know your honest opinion. What do you think of kraplach with cheese?" He looks at me with distrust. "How did we get around to that?" he asks. "Just like this," I explained to him. "I'd like to have you try the cheese kraplach that my wife makes, because tonight, you see, we're going to have a dairy supper." This is too much for him, and he comes right back at me with, "Not this time. You're not going to keep me here another day, I can see that. But you can't do it. It isn't right. It isn't right." And from the way he fusses and fumes, it's easy to see that I won't have to coax him too long or fight with him either, because what is he but a man with an appetite who has only one philosophy, which he practices at the table? So I say this to him, "I'll give you my word of honor that if that isn't enough, I'll give you my hand as well. Here, shake, that tomorrow I'll wake you up in time for the earliest train. I promise it, even if the world turns upside down. If I don't, may I, you know what." At this he softens and says to me, "Remember, we're shaking hands on that." And I, "A promise is a promise." And my wife makes a dairy supper. How can I describe it to you? With such kraplach that my traveler has to admit that it was all true. He has a wife too, and she makes kraplach too. But how can you compare hers with these? It's like night to day. And I kept my word, because a promise is a promise. I woke him when it was still dark and started the samovar. He finished packing and began to say goodbye to me and the rest of the household in a very handsome, friendly style. You could see he was a gentleman, But I interrupt him. We'll say goodbye a little later. First we'll have to settle up. What do you mean settle up? Settle up, I say. Means to add up the figures. That's what I'm going to do now. I'll add them up and let you know what it comes to, and you'll be so kind as to pay me. His face flames red. Pay you, he shouts. Pay you for what? For what, I repeat. You want to know for what? For everything. The food, the drink, the lodgings. This time he becomes white, not red, and he says to me, I don't understand you at all. You came and invited me to the bris. You stopped me at the train. You took my bag away from me. You promised me eternal life. That's right, I interrupted him. That's right. But what's one thing got to do with the other? When you came to the bris, you earned your reward in heaven. But food and drink and lodging, do I have to give you these things for nothing? After all, you're a businessman, aren't you? You should understand that fish costs money, and that the wine you drank was the very best, and the beer too, and the cherry cider. And you remember how you praised the tzimmus and the puddings and the borscht. You remember how you licked your fingers, and the cheese scraplach smelled pretty good to you too. Now I'm glad you enjoyed these things. I don't begrudge you in the least, but certainly you wouldn't expect that just because you earned a reward in heaven and enjoyed yourself in the bargain that I should pay for it. My traveling friend was really sweating. He looked as if he'd have a stroke. He began to throw himself around, yell, scream, call for help. This is Sodom, he cried. Worse than Sodom. It's the worst outrage the world has ever heard of. How much do you want? Calmly, I took a piece of paper and pencil and began to add it up. I itemized everything. I gave him an inventory of everything he ate, of every hour he spent in my place. All in all, it added up to something like 30 odd rubles and some kopecks. I don't remember it exactly. When he saw the total, my good man went green and yellow. His hands shook and his eyes almost popped out, and again he let out a yell louder than before. What did I fall into? A nest of thieves? Isn't there a single human being here? Is there a God anywhere? So I say to him, look, sir, do you know what? Do you know what you're yelling about? Do you have to eat your heart out? Here's my suggestion. Let's ride into town together. It's not far from here. And we'll find some people. There's a rabbiner there, let's say the rabbi. And we will abide by what he says. When he heard me talk like that, he quieted down a little. And don't worry, we hired a horse and a wagon, climbed in, and rode off to town, the two of us, and went straight to the rabbi. When we got to the rabbi's house, we found him just finishing his prayers. He folded up his prayer shawl and put his phylacteries away. Good morning, we said to him, and he, what's the news today? The news? My friend tears loose and lets him have the whole story, everything from A to Z. He doesn't leave out a word. He tells how he stopped at the station and so on and so on. And when he's through, he whips out the bill I had given him and hands it to the rabbi. And when the rabbi had heard everything, he says, having heard one side, I should now like to hear the other one. And turning to me, he asks, what do you have to say to all of that? I answered, everything he says is true. There's not a word I can add. Only one thing I'd like to have him tell you on his word of honor. Did he eat the fish? And did he drink the beer and cognac and the cider? And did he smack his lips over the borscht that my wife made? At this the man becomes almost frantic. He jumps and he thrashes about like an apoplectic. The rabbi begs him not to boil like that, not to be so angry, because anger is a grave sin. And he asked him again about the fish and the borscht and the kraplach, and if it was true that he had drunk not only the wine, but beer and cognac and cider as well. Then the rabbi puts on his spectacles, looks the bill over from top to bottom, checks every line, and finds it correct. 30 odd rubles and some kopecks, and he makes his judgment brief. He tells the man to pay the whole thing, and for the wagon back and forth, and a judgment fee for the rabbi himself. The man stumbles out of the rabbi's house, looking as if he'd been in a steam bath too long, takes out his purse, pulls out 2 25s and snaps at me. Give me the change. What change, I ask, and he says, for the 30 you charged me for that bill you gave me. Bill? What bill? What 30 are you talking about? What do you think, I'm a highwayman? Do you expect me to take money from you? I see a man at the railroad station, a total stranger. I take his bag away from him and drag him off almost by force to our own bris and spend a wonderful Shabbos with him. So am I going to charge him for the favors he did me and for the pleasure I had? Now he looks at me as if I really am crazy and says, then why did you carry on like this? Why did you drag me to the rabbi? Why this? Why that? I say to him. You're a queer sort of a person, you are. I wanted to show you what kind of a man our rabbi was, that's all. When he finished the story, my litigant, Reb Nachman Lekach, got up with a flourish, and the 3 other partners followed him. They buttoned their coats and prepared to leave. But I held them off. I passed the cigarettes around again and said to the storyteller, so you told me a story about a rabbi. Now maybe you'll be so kind as to let me tell you a story, also about a rabbi, but a much shorter story than the one you told. And without waiting for a yes or no, I started right in and made it brief. This happened, I began, not so long ago, and in a large city on Yom Kippur Eve. A stranger falls into the town, a businessman, a traveler who goes here and there, everywhere, sells merchandise, collects money. On this day he comes into the city, walks up and down in front of the synagogue, holding his sides with both hands, asks everybody he sees where he can find a rabbi. What do you want a rabbi for, people ask. What business is that of yours, he wants to know. So they don't tell him, and he asks one man, he asks another, can you tell me where the rabbi lives? And what do you want the rabbi for? What do you care? This one and that one, till finally he gets the answer, finds the rabbi's house, goes in holding his sides with both hands. He calls the rabbi aside, shuts the door, and says, Rabbi, this is my story. I'm a traveling man and I have money with me, quite a pile. It's not my money. It belongs to my clients. First to God and then to my clients. It's Yom Kippur Eve. I can't carry money with me on Yom Kippur, and I'm afraid to leave it at my lodgings. I sum like that. So do me a favor, take it, put it away in your strong box till tomorrow night after Yom Kippur. And without waiting, the man unbuttons his vest and draws out one pack after another, crisp and clean, the real red, crackling 100-ruble notes. Seeing how much there was, the rabbi said to him, I beg your pardon. You don't know me. You don't know who I am. What do you mean I don't know who you are? You're a rabbi, aren't you? Yes, I'm a rabbi, but I don't know you. Who you are and what you are. They bargain back and forth. The traveler says, you're a rabbi. The rabbi says, I don't know who you are. And time does not stand still. It's almost Yom Kippur. Finally, the rabbi agrees to take the money. The only thing is, who should be the witnesses? You can't trust just anyone in a matter like that. So the rabbi sends for the leading townspeople, the very cream, rich and respectable citizens, and says to them, this is what I called you for. This man has money with him, a tidy sum, not his own, but first God's and then his clients'. He wants me to keep it for him till after Yom Kippur. Therefore, I want you to be witnesses to see how much he leaves with me, so that later, you understand? The rabbi took the trouble to count it all over 3 times before the eyes of the townspeople, wrapped the notes in a kerchief, sealed the kerchief with wax, and stamped his initials on the seal. He passed this from one man to the other, saying, now look, here's my signature, and remember, you're the witnesses. The kerchief with the money in it he handed over to his wife, had her lock it in a chest, and hide the keys where no one could find them. And he himself, the rabbi, went to shul and prayed and fasted as it was ordained, lived through Yom Kippur, came home, had a bite to eat, looked up, and there was the traveler. Good morning. Good evening, Rabbi. Good evening. Sit down. What can I do for you? Nothing. I came for my package. What package? The money. What money? The money I left with you to keep for me. You gave me money to keep for you? When was that? The traveler laughs out loud. He thinks the rabbi is joking with him. The rabbi asks, "What are you laughing at?" And the man says, "It's the first time I met a rabbi who liked to play tricks." At this, the rabbi is insulted. No one, he pointed out, had ever called him a trickster before. "Tell me, my good man, what do you want here?" When he heard these words, the stranger felt his heart stop. "Why, Rabbi, in the name of all that's holy, do you want to kill me? Didn't I give you all my money? That is not mine, but first God's and then my client's. I'll remind you, you wrapped it in a kerchief, sealed it with wax, locked it in your wife's chest, hid the key where no one could find it, and here's better proof. There were witnesses, the leading citizens of the city." And he goes ahead and calls them all off by name. In the midst of it, a cold sweat breaks out on his forehead, and he feels faint and asks for a glass of water. The rabbi sends the shamas off to the man the traveler had named, the leading citizens, the flower of the community. They come running from all directions. "What's the matter? What's happened?" "A misfortune, a plot, a millstone around our necks. He insists that he brought a pile of money to me yesterday to keep over Yom Kippur, and that you were witnesses to the act." The householders look at each other as if to say, "Here's where we get a nice bone to lick," and they fall on the traveler. How could he do a thing like that? He ought to be ashamed of himself, thinking up an ugly plot like that against their rabbi. When he saw what was happening, his arms and legs went limp. He just about fainted. But the rabbi got up, went to the chest, took out the kerchief, and handed it to him. "What's the matter with you? Here's your money. Take it and count it. See if it's right here in front of your witnesses. The seal, as you see, is untouched. The wax is whole, just as it ought to be." The traveler felt as if a new soul had been installed in his body. His hands trembled and tears stood in his eyes. "Why did you have to do it, Rabbi? Why did you have to play a trick? This trick on me, a trick like this?" "I just wanted to show you the kind of leading citizens we have in our town."